Two.
Hi, I'm Shelly O'Donovan. I'm the founder of the Authentic Influence Group. So I cut my teeth in politics and worked my way up the corporate ladder, really looking at influence in companies and trying to influence that marketplace for my companies. But along the way, I started to pick up all of these tricks and tips. I learned nonverbal body language and I saw the difference that it makes in people's careers and just how it can really take you to the next level. So, the best piece of advice that I have ever gotten was ears and eyes open, mouth shut.
Ooh, that's interesting. So, where did you get that, Shelley? That's awesome advice. Where'd you
Yeah,
get that?
I got that advice in politics very early on, one of my first days on the job. And as you can imagine, that's probably a very strong piece of advice when you're working in politics.
Wow. That's interesting. So, were you actually a politician or did you work
No.
in the space? Okay.
No, I worked in the space, so I supported politicians. So I was crafting their talking points. I was also at some points in my career sitting on committees trying to help them decipher what this policy that they were having to vote on looked like, why they should support it or not support it, trying to give them kind of all the research behind it and really at a pretty young age making decisions on how to prep these lawmakers, whether to vote yay or nay on something.
Oh my goodness. And so you had to listen more than you talk there, which is really interesting, right? Because influence, often people think we have to be loud and
Yeah,
obnoxious and like, listen to me. And it's like, I
exactly.
don't know. So,
No.
so what did you find that, that others followed that? Or did many like say, no, 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 I've got to be the best? How did that work?
Yeah, so there's folks on both sides of that coin, right? So there's lots of folks who think like I'm just going to be out here talking and people are going to listen. But usually what happens when you approach things that way is you lose people. And so it's really interesting that it's the backdoor approaches to influence that seem to really open the doors and seem to really help you move and kind of move up either in politics or move up channels in a company.
Wow. Okay. Okay, so that's interesting, and that's kind of maybe different than what a lot of us have been taught. So give me a good listening example. How do we listen to influence?
Yeah, so one of the basic things that I will tell you is to start by actually listening. So we get so caught up in what we're going to say next. Like when I have a conversation with you, instead of really listening to what you're saying. And so if I just take the time to actually zone in and really listen to you, then I'm going to, I can take a couple minutes here or there to really think about what you said and then respond. And that's going to make the biggest difference in how people approach you.
Wow. Okay, so listen, then respond. Okay,
Yeah.
got that. But aren't we all about the soundbite though? I mean, aren't we trying to, jam it into 140 characters or into one thing that we can put on screen? How do we balance that need to be, need to be concise and need to be,
Yeah.
quick and deliberate with the need to listen?
Yeah. So, and you're right about that. And the one thing I say all the time is how you package your communication matters. So, even in the corporate world, people always say, oh, that person just took my idea. Well, they may have, but they probably took your idea and repackaged it in a way that others understood better. And that's why they're getting more traction with it. And so it comes down to kind of how you communicate, how you package those ideas, how you pull them together.
Okay. So is there a formula for that? Is there something that you teach that helps us understand better how we can package our ideas in a more meaningful, influential way?
So it depends a little bit on the situation, but the first thing is just not overthinking it, right? Making it very simple. And when you approach someone, really thinking about what they need to know about you or about the situation instead of just trying to kind of dump all the information that you know. Because it's so easy. We just want to like brain dump on someone and tell them like everything and all that we know about a topic, right? Instead of like just telling them what they need to know in the moment.
Okay. So, yeah, so less is more in
Yes.
many cases, right? Less is more. Wow. Okay. Well, that's good for many of us because not everybody wants to share everything out there. But you talk a lot, as you mentioned, about influencing others, and you've got some verbal and some nonverbal cues that we can follow. So let's start with some of the verbal cues that we can follow to get people to engage more with our ideas and with what we're saying or wanting them to do.
Yeah, so the first thing is just again listening, but then also just using kind of these listening cues to show that you're engaged in whatever that is and trying to get them to talk a little more. So you can pull them in by using different phrases. So, I hear what you're saying, Phil, but could we try it this way? What just having that conversation that it's really becomes this back and forth. So from a verbal perspective, those are some of the things that you could easily do.
Those are simple. Those are simple,
Yeah.
right? Being more conversational. I hear what you're saying. Not and then non-verbally, right? Like nodding, smiling. What
Yeah.
else do we have there at our disposal? Especially as we're more kind of more unfortunately or maybe fortunately more virtual than ever, but more on camera like all the darn time.
Yes. So camera is tough, right? And the first thing is just looking into the camera when you can, really seeing the person on the other side of the screen. I know in a Zoom meeting that's challenging because you might have like 40 boxes of other people, right? But if you're actually presenting or you're the one talking, you want to be looking into the camera when you're doing that. You also want to be showing your hands. So hands are trust signals. So if I don't see your hands and we're having conversation, there's a part of me that feels like there's something just not right here. And it comes back to kind of when we were cavemen and, we're walking down the dirt path and I see Phil and I'm just like, does Phil have a weapon or not? And so I need to see your hands, right? And if I can see your hands, then I know you don't have a weapon. And even though I know that in today's world, hopefully we're not having to look for that. But I still need to know if you and I are going to be friends. And so subconsciously, my mind is still looking for that. Can I see your hands? Are they moving? And it also punctuates everything that you do, right? When you talk and you speak. And it gives us a much more open connection as well.
Yeah, well, I always practice my karate on these interviews. That's usually helpful, right? And, no, I'm just kidding, but I totally agree with you on that. And it's interesting because I've watched people that are very articulate, but if they don't show me their hands, it's almost like they're just like a floating head, like,
Yes.
"Woo, where are we going here?" And it's so interesting that you say that. So yeah, caveman, yeah, no stick here. I'm not going to beat you with a club. So that's good. So what about understanding some of those facial expressions? I mean, do we read too much into that or not enough into that? And what are some ones that we need to maybe be aware of that we're doing without even thinking about it?
Yeah, so body language is really interesting, especially facial expressions. And the reason is because we leak so much information from our faces. And so if you can start to really read people, then you can pick up things. So I can certainly pick up if you're happy, if you're really happy and smiling. So there's the fake smile, which is, somewhere here. And then there's like the real smile. And so for someone who's really smiling, you can see it here, like in the sides of their eyes, and their eyes are going to crease. And that's how you know. So even under a mask in today's world, you can still see when somebody's really happy. And so that's really pulling through. So looking for that fake smile though could be important if someone says, do you want to work on this project with me? And there's like a fake smile, maybe that gives you a cue that they don't want to. The other thing you can look for is contempt, which I think is the most easy to spot, and also the micro expression that is the most misunderstood. So it is kind of a half smile. I don't even know if I can do it here, but and it really shows that I don't like what you just said at all. Like I'm just some disgust there, probably. I'm not happy about it at all. But the problem is that most people think it means like, oh, that's kind of okay. But it does not mean that. Like it's definitely something like, oh, whatever Phil just said, I didn't like at all.
So what
So
do we do with that though, Shelly? What do we do with that? If somebody's got
yeah.
contempt for our idea, right? If I like say, Shelly, I'm gonna interview you on the moon tomorrow, and you're like, the hell you are. I mean, do you call me out on that? I mean, what
So
do I do if
gently.
I notice there's
So you
contempt?
might do it gently. So certainly if it's something where you're like, I don't even care if she meets with me on the moon tomorrow, right? Then you might just let it go. And then you kind of know that I'm not really interested in doing that, right? But if you really want to get to the bottom of like why I might feel that way, then you start to ask some questions and you can pepper in some really good questions like, oh, you know, so tomorrow when we meet, like, do you think that we should, meet this way, or should we have the interview in this format? And just continue to try to peel back and get more and more information. You can, and depending on the relationship, right? If we were really good friends, like I could totally call you out on it and be like, Phil, I saw that you're not happy with what I just said, right? But it depends. Can't do that with everybody. And certainly in a business setting, that's often not appropriate. So it's just peeling back the layers, trying to get more information.
Cool. Cool. I like that. I think that's good. And one of the interesting things you put in kind of your pre-call is,
Yeah.
that we can teach people how to become a human lie detector. I'm going to guess those creases in the eyes certainly help, and the viewing of contempt, but what else can we look for
Yeah.
to kind of become a better lie detector?
Sure. So lie detection is a really robust science, and there's a lot of robust science behind it. So we are lied to 200 times per day, if you can believe that, which is insane. So it's about 2 to 3 times per 10-minute conversation. So, it's incredible to think that in this conversation, we've probably put through some lies too, even, right? But I call that out so that people know that everyone does it. So it's human nature to lie. And there's all sorts of lies. There's like the little white lies that, you tell me that, my frame looks good on the camera or whatever. But then there's like the real zingers, right? The real big lies. And then there's also lies that you might tell yourself to kind of either make yourself feel better, or you might tell somebody else just to kind of rapport build. I like your bracelet at a networking reception or something like this, just to build that rapport. So those are the context of the lies. But lie detection is really involves science. And so most people have about a 54% accuracy rate on detecting lies, which is pretty bad when you think about it. So it's only a little bit more than like the flip of a coin. But once you learn how to become a human lie detector, you can get that up to about 90%. So the first thing that you do is you baseline someone, which means you're taking in a lot of information about what is in their baseline, kind of what they actually do in order to just communicate naturally. So how do they typically communicate? And then the next piece is you start to look for certain cues. And so there's statistically things that liars do, but you're also just going to look for them to make different different micro expressions or different cues. And so there's a whole process behind that we teach and we can walk somebody through, but this becomes really important, certainly in the business context as well.
Wow. Wow, that's cool. And 54 to 90% is a massive jump and can
Yes.
make a massive difference. So, is it normally like executives that come to you for help, or who are you working with, Shelly, that needs to get better at being a human lie detector?
Yeah, so I do work with executives, and we do a little bit of lie detection. We do a whole lot of other stuff wrapped around body language and just visibility in the workplace, influence building, and all that stuff. But usually they want like a little piece of the lie detection. So it is executives. I mostly work in the healthcare industry, so a lot of healthcare execs, and they just want to increase their influence. And part of that is that lie detection phase. But I tell people just to be careful with it, because once you know it, you sometimes can't turn it off. And so you occasionally will not even be thinking about trying to figure out if somebody's lying, and you catch it and you're like, oh, I wish I didn't see that. Like,
That's so funny.
yeah,
I can imagine that's the case, right? I'm sitting maybe at church or in
yeah,
class or something, and I'm like, Yep, they're lying. Yeah,
Exactly.
that sucks. So that's so funny. So your company is called Authentic Influence. I mean, not to be banal, but like, what's the
Yeah.
difference? Authentic versus inauthentic influence. What's the difference there?
Yeah. So I really try to help people uncover who they are essentially, and you use all these tricks and tips, whether it's nonverbal language, whether it's um, visibility in the workplace, to help them to still be who they are at the core and still be influential. Because Phil, you're going to influence a very different way than I am, and that's okay. And it's only really going to work really well if we figure out exactly what that is for you, right? If you try to influence the same way I do, it probably isn't going to work, and it's going to be challenging for you, and you're going to be stressed out and you're going to be frustrated, and it's just not going to work. So what I do is I try to work with them to really uncover the things that work for them, what they're comfortable with, and just try to take them up to the next level.
Cool. Is influence measurable? I mean, how do we know that we're
Yeah.
becoming more influential?
So there are a number of ways, like certainly you can start to see it because you see that people react to you a little bit differently than they did. Those are like some of the early cues, but usually when I work with folks, the biggest cue is usually that they make a move in their career. So they're stuck at like manager, director level. They can't get to the next level. And 6 months go by and eventually like they do it. They move up to that next level.
Wow. Okay. So I find out how I influence. Then I guess I learn how to influence,
Right.
meaning that, right, and then I actually do it. So give me some insight here into that, kind of unpacking who how I influence or how someone would influence with that.
Yeah. So the first thing I often do work with my clients on is just personality. Like, who is Phil, right? And I don't dive so deep into like MTBI or anything like that. But what I really just zone in is on like the big five factors. And so we try to figure out exactly who Phil is and then what he's comfortable with. And a lot of times I'm running bigger programs within companies. So I have like 10 or so individuals and we go in companies and work with them. And so there's a lot of sharing and there's a lot of information that comes out about like the company culture. And so how does Phil's personality fit in with that particular corporate culture? And so that gives a lot of information about how to help you move up. And then there's a lot of, body language that's layered in there, a lot of just visibility, like how to be more visible in the workplace, what things to look for. Going back to my piece of advice in the very beginning, one of the biggest things is just to kind of keep an eye out of what's happening around you, but not necessarily be the one to kind of be circulating information. But there's a lot of good sources for information that you can kind of find out, like what's happening in your company and why things are happening, what projects are there, who's getting on certain projects, why they're getting on certain projects. And you can position yourself to be in that lane and kind of get in that direction, in that flow, so that you can move up to the next level.
That's encouraging that we can learn that and use that to
Yeah.
move up. Is there a difference between men and women, or older, younger, or people of color? I mean, what give me some of the differences
Yeah.
or the
So
similarities maybe.
yeah, and it depends a little bit sometimes on the corporate culture as well. So certain corporate cultures have, different folks in higher levels, and so really trying to help individuals who aren't in those high levels to get up there, but also to see what patterns are there and see how we can overcome some of the patterns that might be holding them back, and move them forward. But just in terms of body language, I mean, women tend to not always be as open and kind of as big in their bodies, like because as children, women are kind of taught to close in often. So just helping them to release that. But I have also worked with men on the flip side who were very, very tall in stature, and we've kind of closed them in a little bit more because it becomes too intimidating for the people around them. And so that can be a problem as well. So really looking at kind of how you are coming across in that space and what makes sense for for you and how we can kind of tweak that to make it better.
Great. So is versatility something that we can learn? I mean, you talked about, some men are bigger, and I would,
Yes.
argue typically I'm pretty big personality wise, which I know, I know that I have to tune that in. So how does versatility play into that, Shelly?
Yeah, I mean, it's really important. And it's also really important to think about context. So, you said you're a big personality. There may be rooms where that is really called for, and you've got to really bring it out like big time, right? Probably when you're speaking
Yep.
and that's important. But there might be other places where you pull it back. And the same is true for body language. So, if you're a CEO and you're going up to give a talk on a stage, like that may be one place you want to be big, and you might want to be making big gestures because you got people, aisles and aisles back. But on the flip side, if you're trying to go in and just have a conversation with a small team of your employees, you might want to tone that down a bit. I was working with one client, and he told me, he's like, yeah, when we interview people, he's like, I come in, I put them on the other side of the table, and I kind of put my arms out. And he's like, and I do this thing called the cowboy cross. And I can't really show you here, but essentially you're putting like your ankle on your knee, and you're kind of open. Your leg, one leg is kind of open. And it's a very aggressive American, initially American gesture. And it can be really intimidating for the person on the other end. And he was, he's struggling. He was like, oh, nobody wants to work for me. And I'm like, you are it's super aggressive. Like, you need to tone that down. And he started to tone that down, and we worked on ways to do that, and things, resolved a bit. So that kind of stuff is really important. And it's not stuff we're taught ever. Like,
Yeah.
nobody thinks about it. We're not taught it. Like, we're taught how to go in and have an interview for a company, and we're taught what to say, but we're not taught like how to say it. And it's so important.
Yeah. Well, yeah, context is the biggest thing that I find is often missing, because people
Yes.
think a one size fits all. Like, I'm
Mhm.
always big and look at me.
Yeah.
And it's like, I will tell you that 20 years ago, when I started, thinking about it, I knew that at times I would come off as too big, especially my team meetings. I only had 8 people on my team. So my personality, I'd really slow it down, especially at 6:30 in the morning when we had our team meetings, because half the team's barely awake, and half the team is hates my guts because I'm making a meet at 6:30. So I just slow down, right, and put myself in the middle and be part of the team,
Right.
instead of kind of because often, right, we're, I don't know, maybe it's conscious, maybe it's not, but as a leader, you sit at the end of the table as the person who owns the house. You sit at the head of the table.
Yeah.
So how do we, give me some unlearning things that maybe we need to unlearn from a body language. I love your cowboy cross, because I see that, and I can totally see how that would be like, whoa, that's a big, like, stay the heck away from me.
Yes, absolutely. And that's some of it. So some of these like big gestures when you walk in somewhere. I once was on a speaking event. It was like before it started, and there was a guy that came in the second row, tall guy, sat down and stretched his arms out, and he took like 3 chairs, 2 or 3 chairs on either side. And I was like, oh my goodness. Like, it's such good body language, like learning for me, but too much, right? Just too much. Nobody's going to sit anywhere near him. And I don't know, maybe that's what he was trying for, but that's the flip side of it. Like, all of this stuff has consequences on the back end. So I think one of the things we need to unlearn, so you and I are talking about like what to do if you have a big personality, but on the flip side, there are lots of people who kind of pull in too much. And so, I'm cold in the office, so I'm just going to sit in meetings and cross my arms, and I'm a little bit shy, so I'm not going to engage too much, even though I'm totally listening. Like, that is a problem, and that's a real block in your career. And if you're doing that, like I tell people, just make sure you dress warm enough so you can have your arms open, because that shows that you're open to the engagement. Talk within the first few minutes of the meeting, even if it's just something, rapport building or whatever, because that's going to warm you up for later. But all of those things become really important. So for women, especially, like opening up that body language, because we're really taught to do the opposite, and it's not good for engaging with people, and it's certainly not good in the business world.
Good. So Yeah, so dress warm and
Yeah.
open up a little bit, not overwhelmingly open. Don't be
Yeah.
like the guy in the front row or the second row
Exactly.
stretching out, unless you're on an airplane, in which
Right.
case you don't want people to sit next to you. That might work for you. So
Yeah.
that's
And
pretty funny.
well, and the other thing is so nervous. So when we get nervous, or sometimes if we get bored, we start to do certain things that really are distracting to others. So we might be like, rubbing our shoulders because we're distracted, or like touching our neck or something. Like that is all kind of nervous behavior that you want to try to pull back. On the flip side, though, if I see that in somebody else, then that gives me a cue, right? It gives me this clue that maybe I said something that made them uncomfortable, or maybe I'm making them uncomfortable with my own body language. So all of this kind of works two ways. And if you can start to read people, you pick up so much information. Like you can not even hear what they're saying and kind of understand the temperature in a room.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. That's great. That's good stuff. So you shared about starting by listening. You talked about packaging ideas, saying things like, I hear what you're saying, be more conversational. And then you taught us how to be a human lie detector and how to pay more attention and be more intentional with your
Yeah.
context and what's going on, and that it goes two ways. So if folks want one more tip here, Shelly, one more thing that they could use or where they should get started. Obviously, I know you said about listening, but what would that be if you're to leave them with anything?
Yeah. The one big tip that I would say is to really tape yourself, film yourself sometime, whether that's in a Zoom meeting, and just see what you're doing. See what you're doing with your hands. See how you're communicating. Are you looking at the camera? You want to kind of forget that you're filming yourself, but then go back and look and say, oh, like I'm, tapping my foot, and I can see that, like I'm bouncing on the camera. So I can see that I'm tapping my foot. And then going back and kind of taking those things out, it's going to make your communication that much more impactful, and it's going to give you the key information that you really need in order to take your career to the next level.
Awesome. Great advice. Record yourself and see what you're actually communicating with what you're doing, and then take it out and see if you communicate something different, and just be aware of that. I think
Yeah.
that's wonderful, wonderful advice, Shelly. Good stuff. So if folks want to get more connected with you, if they have more questions, if they
Yeah.
want to know more about body language and context and how this all matters and plays together, where would you send them?
Yeah. So you can either find me on LinkedIn. I put out a lot of videos on LinkedIn. So Shelly O'Donovan, or you can track us down at our website, AuthenticInfluenceGroup.com.
Awesome. Awesome. That's great stuff, Shelly. I so appreciate that. So much value here today for folks. And, 54% accuracy. Most people think they're better than that. So
Yes.
you can improve, and you're lied to 200 times a day. I'm not lying now when I say, Shelly, thank you so much. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
the time and the insight. This was great.
Great. Thank you. It was fun.
Yeah, for me too. Thank you.